T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Kush's Corner here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. Tonight is a very, very special episode, one that I've been wanting to do for a long time. I'm joined by Scott Flood of Flood Reptiles, probably, and I guess I'll ask him on the show, the most successful Boelen's python breeder ever, definitely currently doing it. We're going to discuss all aspects of Boelen's pythons throughout the episode, one of my favorite reptile species. But before we get into that, as always, USARK. So USARK is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, and to live this lifestyle. Check out usark.org for all of the information you need to know about the organization. This is where they post alerts on legislation that is introduced at local or national levels and updates on legislation that is currently in process. This is also where you can become a member of USARK. As a community, we have strength in numbers. The more people that are behind the cause, the better. And here we are. Thank you to everybody for tuning in tonight. This is going to be a good one for sure. Shout out to the people who are already up in the live chats. It's definitely good to be back after missing last week. The network is on its annual summer break right now, but I definitely was not going to miss the opportunity to do this show here. But if you are here on YouTube watching, please subscribe to the channel, like, comment, share, do all that good stuff. Hit the notification bell. New podcasts drop every single day of the week live here on the channel from some of the best hosts in the game, talking about a wide variety of topics from within the reptile industry. So if you are a fan of reptile podcasts, you have found the right place. We are also on the audio platforms, be that Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcast from. A follow, a 5-star review on those platforms would be much appreciated. With all that housekeeping out of the way, let's bring Scott onto the show. Hey, Scott, thanks for joining me.
Yep, thank you.
So, I guess congratulations first and foremost on the recent Boelen's collection. We were chatting on a little bit ahead of time, but definitely something that a lot of us would only dream of being able to see in person one day.
Yeah, it's a learning experience, though.
Yeah, absolutely. As this all is. It seems like the Somalia genus in general, but particularly Boelen's pythons will really give you a run for your money. I've definitely had my hardships this year and in years past, but they're worth it, though. They're amazing.
It only gets worse, though.
Well, I'm not going to say I'm looking forward to it, but I guess I'm going to embrace the challenge that is to come. So I figure that most people who are listening are at least somewhat familiar with you and your work. But for those of us, or for those of the listeners who are not, kind of give us a little bit of a rundown of your life and times and reptiles and kind of what brought you to where you are today.
Like everybody, I started young, and as long as I can remember, I've had reptiles. So probably back in the 80s when I started getting my exotic reptiles is when I started. I pretty much kept every type of python and boa I could get my hands on, along with monitors. Monitors were really my main focus in that time.
Okay.
So I worked with several different species, like 15 different species of monitors.
Wow.
Which were really tough to get a hold of back then. They're not as common like they are now. So
sure.
We really had to work at getting pairs. Breeding was really rough back then. So along with keeping them alive. So
what were the monitors that you were working with back in the day?
I had a little bit of everything. Water monitors, the tree monitors, the Argus monitors, crop croc monitors were my favorite.
Mhm.
I had a pretty big group of them. Um, I had a little bit of everything. So, too many to list. So
Fair enough.
you know,
Fair enough. Yeah.
I forget more stuff that I've kept than I remember. So, and I did turtles and tortoises, and I had the monkey tail skinks. I bred those back in like 1990.
That's awesome.
So, but and those things live forever. You know, I ended up giving those to a buddy of mine. You know, and, you know, they're probably 40 years old now. So.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
They were wild caught adults, so who knows how old they were. So, and they're still alive. So.
That's awesome.
But then I got into, you know, the pythons and boas, and got out of reptiles for a while. Did the horse. After I met my wife, she wanted to do horses, so I've always kept reptiles. You know, I don't think there's ever been a year I didn't have anything, but we got into the horses real bad, so you know, did that for a number of years. Then after my wife got hurt, we quit doing the horses so much, and I got back into keeping snakes, and kept a lot of everything. Tried to buy Boelens once before when they were cheap. I think they were like $1,000 to $1,200 at the time I tried to buy them the first time.
Yeah.
Mid 2000s, and sold a bunch of stuff, and then that deal fell through. So I ended up taking that money and bought a bunch of boa morphs and started working with those.
Okay.
And then a buddy of mine ended up giving me a 2.2 group of Boelens breeding loan, and after I had them for a while, that's what I knew I had to work with. So I sold everything else and bought 4.4. So
Okay. So what was it about them that after your decades of keeping made you say, okay, this is what I'm going to focus my full energy on?
They're just, I don't know, they're so much more active than most snakes. You know,
Okay.
I mean, plus if you look at them, I mean, they're one of the most beautiful snakes.
Yeah, 100%.
So, and not too many people had success with them, and I thought I could do it. So, you know, so I just went for it. So.
Yeah. So you had the 2.2 on loan, and then you added an additional 4.4.
Yep.
Okay.
So, and you know, I got the 4.4 after they were like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, and he power fed them, and they're humongous animals, and they just don't thrive at that size, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I put them on a diet, and you know, got the first ones to breed after keeping them for 3 or 4 years. I got a clutch of eggs out of the first female.
Okay.
You know, and it ended up being 29 infertile eggs, you know, which really sucked. You know, as she's laying them, they're nice, perfectly white eggs. And, you know,
Damn.
as more I looked at them, I'm like, they're a little bit bigger than a golf ball. I didn't really know how big the Boelen eggs should be.
Yeah.
I'm like, these are infertile. And sure enough, they were infertile. So,
yeah.
So that kind of sucked the first year.
So, you know, the topic of putting an adult python on a diet is definitely not the easiest one to broach. I mean, they hold that weight. What was it?
You
what
basically quit feeding them for a year. So
yeah. So it was just straight up.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, just fast them, and you know, feed small food items. So it's what I did, and you know, it took a long time to get them down to what I thought was a decent weight.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they were still 10.5 feet long, you know, so they're big snakes, you know, and I got one left out of that group, and she's pushing probably 11 feet long. So she hasn't grown much in the amount of time I've had her.
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, I think I had her, I think I had her for 11 years. I think she only grew 6 inches since I've owned her.
Okay. So when you said that the previous owner was power feeding, like how frequently was he feeding the snakes?
Well, he got them snakes up to 8 feet long in 3 years,
Oh,
eight and a
okay.
half. So quite a bit. So
Yeah. Jeez.
yeah, more than what I feed mine. So my 3-year-olds are about 6 feet long.
Okay.
So you know, and you know they generally breed at 4. The males will breed at 6 feet long at 3 years old, no problem.
Okay.
I know that for a fact. So
Wow. That's
you
even
know,
with a really big female.
yep. I had them with a really big female. So and the females took an extra couple of years. I tried them at 4 years old, but they're probably just shy of 7 feet long. So once they got that 7 foot mark, they bred no problem. So
Okay. And for you, a 7-foot Boelen's python, what size prey is that eating?
medium rat.
Okay.
So, probably what nowadays is considered a large rat. So I used to raise my own rodents, so and my size difference is way different than what these people sell now. So
Yeah.
they got like 10 too many sizes in there. So
Yep. Okay. So what would you say, probably in the like 175 gram range?
I wouldn't even know. I wouldn't even
Okay.
guess.
Okay. So, all right. But then does that mean
It was enough to leave a small lump in them, and usually the lump would be gone in 2 days. So
okay. Got it.
and I'd only feed maybe every 3 weeks. So
Okay.
on like that size. So it don't take much for a Boelen's to retain that weight. So,
Yeah.
probably mainly because I keep them so cold. So
Yeah. So I guess let's kind of get into that husbandry side of things, because that's definitely one of the things that makes these snakes so unique. Is obviously their natural environment, just how different it is from really every other python species. Maybe the only one you could kind of compare to, but in a different manner, is diamond pythons. So what's your general husbandry practice like with these animals? I guess and you can at any point, but like throughout their life cycle.
let's see. I don't keep any in tubs for one, other than
Mhm.
hatchlings. Everything goes into a cage so I can see them. So
Sure.
and I build all my own cages. My snake room temperature, the ambient temperature in my snake room is 72 on average, and the hottest will ever get is like 74, and the coldest 55. So so I build my own cages. I use plywood and FRP panels.
Okay.
I glue that to the plywood, and I make basically make my own cages out of that. And then I use PVC for the fronts, so everything's pretty watertight. And I use plywood because it retains heat better.
Okay.
So, and I heat from the top, with lights, and I use 2 lights, one 80-watt floodlight and one 80-watt power sun UV, and then I got a fluorescent fixture over the top, a 4-foot long fluorescent fixture on the top.
Okay.
And I don't do very much ventilation in the cages because each cage is their own little habitat. So, and the ambient temperature in the cage, I keep right around 72. And then the heat lamps, that spot under there is like 85 degrees. So
Okay.
that's how I keep them. So,
what period of time do you have that basking spot on for?
12 on, 12 off, approximately.
Do you change that throughout the year at all?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. And I do not do any food cycling either. So I feed them when they're gravid, I feed them. So,
Wow.
if they're hungry, they eat. So,
Interesting.
Well, the biggest thing is with the females, they got such a food response. It's for the safety of the males. So when I'm adding a male with a female, she'll just tag his ass and chomp down on him like you not believe. So if they're hungry, so as long as I feed them, they lose that food drive. So they're not attacking the male or me every time I get in the cage. So mine are pretty aggressive. So
okay.
They're not tame like you see all these other people holding theirs, and I don't hold mine. So.
And what do you equate that to? Just lack of interaction, like you said, not holding them, or just because they're maybe hungrier than other people's are?
Probably both.
Okay.
They're always hungry. They'll eat every day.
Sure.
But I make them work for their food. I let them crawl around, be a snake for a while. So
Okay. Well, to kind of keep on the husbandry topic, so you said you start babies out in tubs. What are the parameters that you're running those tubs at?
I just use the small Cambro tubs with a heat tape in the back.
Okay.
I usually set it at about 84 degrees.
Okay. In that same room with the cool ambient?
No, I got a separate room for the hatchlings. So.
Okay. What's the ambient temp in there?
Probably 74. So it's upstairs in my house. So
okay.
My snake room's in the basement. So
okay. Cool. And how long are you keeping them in that kind of hatchling type setup? How long until their life?
Until they're doing good, and I can put them in a 2x2x2 cage. So,
okay.
To where it's so huge that it freaks them out. So
sure.
So they're pretty good size by the time I move them. So it'll probably be, I don't know, 6 months.
Okay. Cool.
And then I had to build my rack, my cages for them to put them in. So okay. I probably would have done it sooner if I had the cages already done. But
yeah, fair enough.
So.
Yeah, fair enough. So those first 2x2x2 cages, they're in your main room that stays cooler?
Yep.
Okay.
And they're actually a 4-foot long cage divided in half. So I actually just took out the dividers in it now. So now they got a 2x4 foot space for them. The ones that I held back.
Okay. And at what age are you making that upgrade?
Well, they'll be 2 years old this year, so
okay,
quite 2 years old.
So pretty young.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're pretty good size. They're probably 4 feet long now. So
nice.
By 2000, my 2021s are probably they're coming close to 7 feet long now, 6.5, 7 feet long.
Wow.
So I'll try to do them next year. So
okay, very cool. So lots of people have kept Boelen's pythons many different ways. What are some of the problems that you've seen other people run into running them generally at higher temperatures like other pythons?
Well, they don't breed, and they feed them way too much. You don't need to feed a Boelen's like you do everything else. So
yeah,
they grow on very little food. So
okay. So
if they grow long and then they start bulking up after about 3 or 4 years, they start putting that weight on.
Okay. So, that makes sense. That's kind of a similar trajectory to a lot of scrub pythons that kind of do that same thing. They go elongate first and then fill out into more of an adult shape.
Boas. When I was doing boas, that was the same way with boas. They get long and stay slender, and then after 2 or 3 years, they start putting on the weight. So
right.
I kind of feed everything like I did boas. Because boas you can overfeed real easily. So
Sure.
and I just take that with all my other snakes. I just do this.
Yeah. Very cool. So the UV lighting that you're using, you said it's like a power sun bulb.
Power sun bulb.
Okay.
The mercury vapor bulb.
Okay.
So,
And do you see them basking under them a good bit?
they'll bask underneath the UV light more than they'll go underneath the regular floodlight.
Okay.
When they were gravid, they pretty much laid underneath the UV light the whole
Wow.
time. So I don't know if it's necessary, but they seem to like it, so I use it.
Sure.
So
And I have to imagine essentially a diurnal python that relies so much on the sun would definitely key into that lighting.
well, where they're from, the UV is really extreme where they're from. So
Yeah.
So I figured it can't hurt, by offering it. And I experimented when I first started doing it to see if, because, most people don't think snakes need UV. So, I'm like, well, let's see. I did an experiment on my older cages. I had 4 lights across the top. I put UV on one side and floodlights on the other side, and they never went on the other side unless I moved the UVs over there. So they tend to like the UV. So
Okay.
and the UV lights aren't hotter or anything, so they put pretty much the same temp.
Oh, okay.
So,
Interesting. Yeah, because the mercury vapor lights I've used in the past, like with monitors, have been really hot.
oh yeah, they get hot if you're inches away from it, but my basking spot's a foot down from the lights. So
Okay.
and my lights are mounted on top of the cage, not inside the cage, so the heat goes out. So
Got it.
So there's a big difference,
Yeah. Okay.
If they're inside the cage, it'd be a lot hotter.
Sure.
Especially when, if your room's not 70 or 72 degrees. So
Yeah. No, that definitely makes a big difference on the ambient temperature. Okay. That's interesting. So that the sorry?
I was gonna say, and this is the way I do it. People may
Yeah.
try, and I've talked to people, and one guy, he lost his Boelens from an RI, because I was telling him how I do it, and I don't know if he just paid enough attention to his snakes for them to catch an RI. So what I do might not work for everybody. So
Sure.
and I watch my animals all the time, so I'm pretty, I know what my animals are doing. So
Yeah. I mean, shoot, if I had a snake that was, not that a valuable snake is more, worthy of this, but man, if I had that much invested into some of these animals and I wasn't looking at them all the time, I'd be like, what the hell am I doing? Like, if you have a Boelen's python and you ignore it enough to miss it on
Boelens python put in a rack, you shouldn't have that snake.
Yeah.
They're just so interesting to watch, especially during breeding season. I sit down there for 2 or 3 hours at a time watching them. So, I just got it off the chair. I just roll around and watch. It's like watching. My cages are 6 foot long by 3 foot tall by 3 foot deep. So I got 3 of them lined up, right, and then one on the end. So it's like watching big screen TV.
Yeah. Very cool. So, how do you kind of furnish your enclosures? Do you use plants, branches? What? Because I've seen them; they're definitely like very nice and clean. But what do you do for them to kind of
I
stimulate?
got PVC shelves that I made for them. Like I said, one's a foot down from the heat source, and then I got one in the opposite corner. That's a corner shelf.
Okay.
That's like 8 inches away from the top, and then I got their hide box down below it, which has basically a shelf on top of it, and then I use fake plants. They tear everything up. So, within 6 months, I got to, I can kind of get by and not replace the plants, but they just tear them up. I couldn't imagine live plants in there. So I'd like to, but I think you need a lot bigger cage and a lot bigger plants that can take the abuse.
Sure. No, that definitely makes sense. Okay.
But I'm trying to do these so your average person can get them and know that they can breed them in this size cage.
Yeah.
So, that was my whole thought behind the way I'm doing things. So
Okay.
so your average person can have them, because everyone's like, oh, you need such a big cage for these snakes. You know, bigger is better, but you know, I keep my males in a 6 foot by 2 foot deep by 3 foot tall cage, and they seem to do fine in there. You know,
Okay.
I keep the females in the bigger cages because, you know, during breeding season, I was using multiple males.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely get into that a good bit. So what's the current size of your Boelen's group, if you're willing to share?
I got 10 adults
Okay.
and 15 I'm growing up. So
That's quite a lot. That's quite a lot of Boelen's pythons.
I have more than anybody else in the United States. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. Wow.
And I plan on keeping more. So I really don't like selling them. I really want to just trade Boelens for Boelens so I could get more bloodlines.
Yeah.
So I've been working with some guys that are importing them. So we're going to try to do that. So
Nice.
So some of my stuff will be available, just not through me. But
Okay.
But I told them to give all my information to whoever buys them. You know, I'll be more than willing to talk to them. So
Okay. Cool. Yeah, fair enough. So kind of onto some of the breeding topics a little bit. So you said that you don't food cycle your Boelens, which is definitely surprising considering that that's, you know, I feel like these days one of the main things that most Python people are doing with their snakes. So kind of explain to us your feeding process.
well, I've never really food cycled any snake that I've ever had. So I just figure in my mind, a snake will not refuse a food item.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, snakes are usually hungry all the time. So unless it stops on its own, I'll offer it food. So, and you know, like I said, you know, I feed most of my Boelens. You know, I'll feed them a little bit heavier going into breeding season, like maybe for, I don't know, 2 months. I might feed every 2 weeks going
Okay.
into breeding season. You know, and I don't feed really huge food items. So, like I said, you know, I'll feed anywhere from a medium to an extra large rat. You know, so I change it up a little bit.
Okay.
So, you know, I kind of buy whatever my rodent guy has. So, and I just use whatever I got in the freezer. So, you know, so sometimes they get a medium, sometimes they get a large one. So,
Yeah.
you know, it just varies. So,
Okay.
and I
So
feed all the way through breeding, you know, until the female or male quits eating. So, which
okay.
doesn't happen very often.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. So the increase of food that you're doing before breeding season, is that before you're doing any sort of introductions, or is that while you have males going in?
Nope, that's before any introductions. So,
Okay.
and
And
then
then
when they are breeding, I kind of cut the food back to once a month. So they start breeding in December and don't quit until sometime in March. So
okay. And they've been pretty like regularly seasonal for you, where you're getting activity at the same time.
yep, pretty much you can count on that. Whatever female laid eggs in, like, let's say March 10th, she would lay eggs within a few days of that the following year, is what I've been finding. So
Okay. So your females are going.
pretty on time. So that makes me, you know, I'm going to try a few different things this next season.
So they're going back to back years for you.
Oh yeah, yep. I had one female go 3 years in a row. So, you know, and
Dang.
they don't lose weight at all. So, I mean, yeah, the longest they go without food is a month. So, you know, they don't lose weight. So,
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, they're ready to go. I could breed them right now. They're already back up to weight. So,
Wow. Okay. Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. With
I
the
wish I could breed them right now because it sucks waiting for a whole another year. You know, that's my biggest thing. You know, I want to do so much with these, but I'm getting old, so you know, you're kind of time. You got so much time. You know, so
no, for sure. So, do you look for any signs of development? Are you palpating your females, or is there any benchmark you're looking for before you start pairing?
Yeah, the males will go off. They'll start cruising like crazy. I mean, they just. I'm sure you see with your scrubs, the males will just cruise and pace back and forth, and and that usually starts in December, or well, actually, yeah, the beginning of December usually starts, and
Okay.
then the females, I just wait until I start seeing them develop follicles. So what I've noticed is the females, when you're looking at them, it's really hard to describe, but their scales in the back half of their body line up to where it looks like rows. I was calling them racing stripes, but Mike Stefani, he come up with a better term. They look like corn rows, on a corn cob. The scales
Yeah.
look like they look like that. They get real prominent, and
That makes sense.
so I just watch for that when they start seeing them lines, and I know the females are starting to develop. I don't palpate anything.
Okay.
So I don't. I just always been able to just look at them and see that they're building follicles. So
Okay. Interesting. And then at that point, you're starting your introductions.
yeah, I usually wait a couple weeks for her to develop a little bit more, and then I'll introduce a male, and usually they start breeding within a half an hour. So
Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that's something that I've been trying to figure out for myself with my scrubs as to when I'm going to start putting the males in, because I've had locks like take place before. I palpate my snakes pretty regularly to to track their development, and I've had locks occur before anything they have anything going on. Like I've had females where their first lock was in like October and they lay in like late June, and in that meantime they've locked like 15 times. I'm like,
just 15.
well, that I saw that
A
I've
lot
seen.
15 times in 3 days. So
Yeah, I've seen, but to me, I'm like, is that that seems like an unnecessary amount, like
yeah,
period.
I agree. I'm thinking the same thing with the Bolins.
Yeah.
So that's why this year I'm going to change it up a little bit. So
Okay.
I've been keeping records on all my snakes now. I'm horrible about record keeping. So I don't keep any records on feeding, sheds, none of that shit, But in 23, I started keeping better records of the breeding. And in 24, I really kept better records. I just get these, yearly planners, and I just keep them by the cages. And every time I introduce a male, I write it down. And
Okay.
what I see is different, I just write it down. And that's really helped me a lot, because you can only remember so much shit. So
Sure.
and the phone helps a lot, because it keeps dates and stuff. I can take pictures, lots of pictures for myself. The pictures will be horrible, but I know what's going on in them. So so that helps. So
Sure.
I've been trying to keep a lot better records. So my daughter can, if she wants, she can continue on with this project. So,
Yeah.
but I think the males need to be in there not quite as soon. So
Okay.
I don't think the male Boelens is as fertile as a lot of pythons. So,
Okay, like they have a limited window of fertility throughout the year.
throughout breeding, I think they use it up. So, and I don't know if the sperm dies in the female, or if the male's just not producing enough. Because fertility in eggs is just horrible. So with everybody that breeds Boelens, so very rarely do you get a full clutch of fertile eggs, and very rarely do you get a full clutch of fertile eggs hatch. So I don't know what the deal is. Trying to figure it out. So.
Yeah. I mean, do you have any guesses about the struggles over the years with these guys? Aside from the main one, but like with the fertility and whatnot, do you have any clues yet?
I'm thinking it's the male's just not fertile enough, or he's using it up because everybody put them together. You know, like I said, my breeding season starts in December is when I started introducing them, the end of December, and they'll breed all the way through March. You know, every day they're breeding. So, I mean, multiple times throughout the day, you know, the males are breeding. So I don't know if they're just using it up, you know, or you know, they just don't produce. I don't know. And then I don't know if the female's killing the sperm by laying underneath the basking light, heating it up. So, you know, that's in my mind too. So
Interesting.
so I'm gonna try to do some temperature difference on one, see if that makes a difference. But I have gotten full clutches that are fertile, so you know.
Yeah.
And timing too, you know. I go to the Tinley in March, so that's going to end. So I won't be doing Tinley in March anymore because that's right at the end of my breeding season. So I think that has a lot to play with, you know, me not getting fertile eggs too. So
Okay.
I'm not home to rotate my males in there. So,
Okay. Interesting.
but 2 years I've noticed a difference in that because in 23 I had knee surgery done and I was home in March and I got 2 good clutches that year. So
yeah. Huh. Okay. So I guess let's get into the male discussion. I guess to bring it back, what was the thought process that initially brought you to even attempt to use this method to begin with the Boelens?
well, you know, I've been studying Boelens forever, you know, ever since I wanted them, you know, back in the late 80s. And I talked to everybody about different pythons and stuff. So, you know, I knew diamond pythons had multiple males. Burmese in the wild will have multiple males around them. You know, most snakes do have multiple males around them. So, you know, and, you know, that was my theory on why I should use more males. And, you know, I was concerned about them fighting. You know, everybody's like, oh, the combating's horrible, this and that, which it is. I ain't gonna lie. I found out this year it is pretty bad. So,
Yeah.
you know, but with the young males, they don't seem to combat. They just want to get in there and get go into it, you know. So, you know, so they don't worry about the other males at all. You know, I could throw 5 males in with 1 female, and not a single one of them would push the other one. So, on them, you know, 6 to 7 foot long males. So,
Okay.
it wasn't until they started getting bigger that they started pushing each other around.
Do you think it's more a function of size or age with that kind of dominance behavior?
Probably both.
Okay.
You know, mine was probably age, and I know other people that have had bigger, younger males fight. So, you know, so
Okay.
so I'm guessing it's probably both. So I don't know. It might be. I never believed in keeping my males small. I grow everything the same.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, my males are just as big as my females. So, and so I don't know. It might be a thing just to keep my males smaller so they don't fight. So, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Fair enough.
I might try that with a group of 4 males down the road. So,
Okay. Cool. So when you have multiple males in with 1 female, if 1 male, you know, it gets the job done, you know, is breeding that female, will you remove the other male or will you still keep the
no,
one?
leave them in there. And
Okay.
I found you cannot just throw a bunch of males in with a female. That don't work. So
Okay.
the female gets freaked out and she goes and hides. So and then the males sit there and try to breed each other, you know, and really figure it out. So, but you know, I found any more than 2 males makes the female get nervous and she'll go and hide. But
Okay.
she'll let 2 males do her. So
Interesting.
you know, one will be locked up, and then the other one will be spurring like crazy. So, you know, till it's his turn. So,
Okay. That's actually a great question Lisa has in the chat here. Have you seen a fertility difference between younger males and older males?
no, not yet.
Okay.
My first pair, or my first 2.2, the big group, the big ones that I got from my friend, those didn't produce fertile eggs until I introduced my younger males to the females.
Okay.
So, and I don't know if the two big males bred her or some of the younger males did. So
Yeah.
hard to tell. You know, I've been talking to some of them guys that do the genetics shit. See if we can't do some testings on the offspring and see if there are multiple males that bred them. You know,
Yeah.
that produced them. So,
No, 100%. Yeah, that's something I'm interested in trying to do with scrub pythons in the future is trying to use some of that shed testing to see if I have like a multiple sired clutch like Mike Malukins or something, if I can eventually make that work.
yeah. I talked to a couple of them, and you know, they need to figure out what the code is to know which male would be.
Yeah.
You know, so I need to start talking to them again more about it. So
Yeah.
you know, to me it don't matter because you know I don't think you can. These things are probably inbred in the wild like crazy, so I don't think a little bit inbreeding in the captivity is going to hurt them.
Sure.
You know, because I am keeping track of which clutch came from which female. So, and
Okay.
when I do breed, in the beginning, I use 4 to 6 males in the beginning, but then I take 2 that I want to breed the female. I use them mostly at the end of the breeding. So I'm hoping that maybe one of them 2, which would be they'd be 2 male siblings that are breeding the one female. So I kind of hope that works that way.
Yeah. So when you are rotating like 6 males, are you essentially doing that 2 at a time, and then for how long?
In the beginning, I was, you know, but like I said, this year changed. Everything changed this year. So when they're young, I do 2 at a time. Well, what I do is I put 2 in there, and when the one gets done breeding, a lot of times he'll crawl off and lay somewhere else, and then the other one will be breeding. So I'll yank him out and put another one in there. So, So I'm always rotating a fresh one in there when I see one not breeding. So,
okay. So you're pretty on top of that process then.
Yep.
Okay.
You pretty much got to be. So.
Yeah, I have to imagine so. And then how often are you clearing that cage out completely so you can get her some food?
Probably once 3 weeks or 4 weeks. I'll separate them just for a day. I just separate them for a day. So and I put the male. I feed them a smaller food item when they're breeding.
Okay.
You know? So it barely leaves a lump in them. So.
Okay.
It's just enough to get her mind off of trying to attack somebody. So.
Yeah.
And the males, you know, they will slender down because they are so active. You know, so they need the food to keep the energy up. So.
Okay. So are you feeding the males at a similar interval during breeding?
Yeah, I feed them every 3 weeks. You know, so.
Okay.
But I keep them at a regular size food item. I don't feed them with slightly smaller. So,
okay.
Like the females, I'll make sure I feed them a medium, where the males I'll feed a large. So.
Okay. Cool. So then, what's the point at which you're deciding to switch from, you know, a larger male rotation to the rotation of males that you really want to breed her? Like, at what point in her development are you doing that?
Usually. Sometime in February, usually towards the end of February, I'll start focusing more on the 2 males. So, because I know they usually lay eggs in March and April, so it's usually at the end of February, beginning of March. You know, it just depends on how far they look. You know, if they're getting really thick, you know, so.
Okay.
So it varies. So. And then if the 2 males really aren't doing shit, so then I'll throw another one in there. And I've been using shed skins too. I use shed skins. So.
Okay.
I don't know if it helps, but they do pay attention to the shed skins. So.
Sure. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I've tried that. on occasion with scrub pythons, and I think it did work one time where I had a male who was just like, you know, I had the two males that I had essentially raised up side by side, and one of them started breeding at like 4 years old. He was a monster, and then the other one just would not breed worth a damn. And actually, I had the better breeder male in with a female. He shed in her cage. I wasn't even planning this. I pulled him out, put that other male in, and then that's finally when that guy got the job done, like years later. So
Yeah.
it was annoying.
It's a learning.
Yeah. Yeah. No, these Somalian men, they'll age you a bit. So
It's not for the weak-hearted. So, you know,
no, not at all.
there's a lot of disappointment with them. So, you know, and Boelens are completely different than scrubs.
Sure.
You know, I've raised a bunch of scrubs up, and they're totally different. So, kind of like comparing an emerald tree boa to an Amazon tree boa. You know,
Okay.
The scrub's more like the Amazon, and you know, the Boelens is big, clumsy, like the emerald. So,
Yeah. Well, it's actually interesting you brought that up because that was on my list of stuff to talk about. Yeah. So like, what would be some more comparisons or comparisons, contrasts between scrubs and Boelens? Because I feel like a lot of people think of Boelens pythons as just like the
I
black.
think they need their own little thing. So,
Yeah.
you know, but I don't know nothing. So, you know, but you know, they're totally different. You know, their body structure is different.
Yeah.
They're not as prehensile as a scrub.
Okay.
You know, they'll climb like any other snake, but they're not. You know, they're not as graceful as a scrub. So.
Okay. Interesting.
You know, their head's totally different.
Yeah.
You know, I've drawn a lot of Boelens, you know, and you know, I paid attention. You know, I was getting ready to start drawing some scrubs, you know, and you know, just the scalation is different, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, and you can tell the sex difference between males and females just by looking at them, their heads.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, the female got a much shorter head than the males. I'm sure you know.
Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I feel like I can, with almost complete certainty, look at an adult scrub and be able to tell what sex it is just by head and tail. So.
Yep. Well, body wise, you know, the male's Boelens are so much slenderer than a female. You know, from vent up, you know, that back third.
Yeah.
You know,
that's what I look for too.
A lot thicker. So, you know, I can just tell by looking at them who's who. So,
yeah.
I'm sure you can.
Yeah, that definitely can make it easy with a species like Boelens, where not that they all look the same, but there is
them apart. So I could throw them in a cage and I could pick them all out. So
yeah, that's nice. Yeah, not as bad as like olive pythons or something.
No, yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah.
So kind of back on a little bit of actually, this is a good question Lisa just threw in the chat. Have you ever seen your Boelens dig, and do they nest in burrows, or don't they nest? So yeah.
I don't see them rooting around in the mulch. I keep everything on mulch, you know, 4 inches of mulch. And then in the nest box, I use sphagnum moss. And when they're nesting, they very rarely use them. It's a hide box nest box.
Okay.
It's in the cage all the time.
Okay.
So, you know, they very rarely use it, you know, other than during breeding season. And the female will go in there and dig around, you know, make her little nest in there. You know,
okay.
She's usually underneath the moss. You know, a lot of times I have to pull the moss off the top of them to see if they're laying eggs.
Okay, interesting. So, where do you have your nest boxes placed in proximity to any sort of heat source? And generally, what temperature is it running in that box?
I'd say it's running probably 72 degrees.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You know, it's on the opposite side of the heat. So
okay.
And when I bred my first one laid eggs, some infertile eggs, you know, that nest box was probably 70 degrees because that particular cage was on the floor, so
Okay.
it might have been even colder than that. And when she'd go in that nest box, even before she laid the eggs, that I had a probe for a thermometer fastened to the bottom of that nest box, and that she'd keep it like mid 90s, lower 90s. When she'd go in there, it'd be that temperature all night. And then when she laid the eggs, even though they were infertile, I let her stay on them. I wanted to see how long she'd stay on them.
Yeah.
And she stayed on them for like 2 weeks and kept that temperature at 96 degrees the whole time. So,
Wow.
she got off of them. So,
That's incredible. I would have not guessed that at all.
and I know that, that tub is on the floor of my basement, just a 3/4 inch piece of plywood separating it from the floor, so, I mean, it's probably upper 60s, low 70.
Wow.
And then the following year, she did the same thing. That same snake laid she laid 26 eggs that year, and they most of them looked fertile, so I left her on them. So I like maternal incubation, so
Okay.
I thought I'd go ahead and let her maternal incubate them because they look good.
Mhm.
So they're nice, good size eggs, almost twice as big as the year before. So, and she sat on them, and she kept the temperature right at 92 degrees the whole time. So, so it kind of makes me wonder what we should be keeping these eggs at.
Yeah.
So, I'm definitely gonna. That was the last time I maternal incubated. So, I'm gonna try it again because I need to know what the temperatures are.
Yeah.
And I know they hold the eggs. Their body's totally underneath the eggs. So I don't know if that's just the outside of her skin being. I don't know what the internal temperature was, so I couldn't get a probe in there.
Hmm.
And I didn't have a temp gun at the time, so when I looked at the eggs,
Okay.
But she got off them about a month in because a lot of them were going bad. She got off of them, and I don't know if she's going to come back to them. I just hurried up and took them away because there were a lot of rotted eggs in there. And that was the year I was able to hatch 2. So
From that clutch?
Yep, I hatched a pair out of that clutch, and those will be ones I'm trying to breed next year. So
okay,
that was in 2021. So.
Did those do pretty well for you as far as establishing them, the babies?
Oh yeah, yep. Well, I mean, as good as they are, you got a scent to feed them, so I sent rat fuzzies with coil. So
okay,
that seems to work the best. So
okay, does it seem like that's what they're looking for in their babies are birds?
They'll eat coil for sure. I don't know if that's what they eat in the wild.
Sure.
I'd love to go there one day, but I'm too old and broken up. My body couldn't handle that kind of tracking. So
yeah, from what I've seen and when he's been on the show, Ari's excursions over there, I don't even know if I could pull that off. That's
at your age, I'd be there in a heartbeat. But I'm 58, and both my knees been replaced. I got pinched nerve in my back and neck, and it ain't happening. So
yeah, no, 100%.
I wish I could. I had opportunities when I was younger. I had my friend that I got my Boelens from. He was going over there, and he'd lived there for like 2 months at a time. And
wow.
He was going over there and he was having the natives do a bunch of carvings for him. So, he'd be there the whole time. He'd bring all the antlers with him, and
wow.
So he lived there for a couple months out of the year. So
that's amazing.
I could have went with him, but I was poor, so that wasn't happening, financially. So
yeah, it's why I haven't gone yet. So
it don't sound like it takes a whole lot of money to go over there. I heard Ryan Young say like $5,000 or something.
Yeah. Yeah. But I feel like even coupled with that is just, for anyone with a larger collection, the amount of time taken away from those animals to be over there, that's a stressful thing. but let's see. Yeah. Was it Al?
No, it was not Al, but yeah, he was going with my friend.
Okay.
So my buddy was Kevin Munchnick. So he used to be really big into reptiles years ago. So he's
Okay.
he passed away a few years ago.
Mm.
That's who I got my first Boelens from.
Okay. Very cool. So I want to get kind of, I guess, into kind of step back a little bit in some of their nesting behavior prior to laying their clutches. So you said this year you caught your first ovulation, right?
Yep.
In years past, when you weren't catching the ovulations, what kind of behavioral changes were you seeing in your females, kind of leading up to what would have been ovulation time, and then after that through their pre-lay shed up until they lay their clutches?
Really didn't see no changes going up to it.
Okay.
I believe they're always in the nest box when they ovulated. That's why I didn't catch it.
Okay.
Or just this one that I did catch was just so big that you couldn't miss it. Where the other ones could have just done one side at a time, and you just didn't notice it. So
sure.
Boas do that a lot too. So
okay.
Don't notice it. So, but they'd spend a lot of time in their nest box, and that's why I think that's when they ovulate, was in the nest box. And then once they come out, they're usually done once they ovulate. The males don't want nothing to do with them. So
yeah,
I keep introducing males, until I see no activity whatsoever. So
okay,
I stop.
Okay, interesting. So you don't see like a change in basking behavior during when they're gravid compared to before?
No, they pretty much bask the same. So
okay.
Yeah, but they do retreat back into the nest box. So which normally they wouldn't.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, because that's what I've seen with my scrubs when they're gravid. The ones that are cooking fertile eggs, I've found, they'll kind of come out of their nests in the morning a couple hours after the heat is turned on, sit there for most of the day, and then sometime in the late afternoon go back down and kind of repeat that cycle the next day, which is like, that's something that I've never seen them do otherwise. Any scrub python.
Yeah, mine wait for me to turn the lights on. So they'll have their heads right by the opening, ready to come out.
Okay.
And I turn the lights on when I feel like it. I turn them off when I feel like it. So it's usually right around 12 on, 12 off. So so they're ready to come out and bask. If I get down there a little late, they're ready. As soon as I turn that light on, they're coming out to lay under it. So
okay.
But they usually, sometimes they'll beat me to the nest box before I get down there to turn them off. Other times they'll go down, they'll go in the nest box after the lights out for an hour.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Very cool.
But they twitch too. So I know you see my video of them twitching to generate heat while they're gravid. So
yeah.
So that usually starts about 3 weeks before they lay eggs. So 3 weeks they'll start twitching. So
okay.
I don't know if they're generating heat to stay warmer or what, but they'll do that underneath the basking light too. So.
Okay. Cool. Interesting.
And that's one way that you're going to get eggs, if you see them starting to twitch.
Okay. So you don't see that behavior under any other circumstances?
Nope. If they're not twitching, you ain't getting shit. So
good to know for everyone listening out there. If you are not getting that twitching, you have not gotten far enough yet. Keep going.
Nope.
Okay. Interesting. Well, we're right about at the halfway point of the show. So this is where I'm going to play a couple quick commercials. If you don't mind sticking around for a few minutes, we'll be right back with the rest of the show.
One of the biggest growths we have in the reptile industry today are the rare species of reptiles that aren't worked with. That's right. That's why I went ahead and partnered up again with Brian Susan over at SUNDOWN Reptiles. Brian works with species such as kahua geckos, gargoyle geckos, all species of tree monitors. He works with Abronia and many other cool species geckos that you can check out all on his website. Head over to sundownreptiles.com, see what he has available. Brian's one of the best doing it in the reptile industry today. He's been on the show multiple times, so make sure you check out all of Brian Susan's episodes on Trap Talk Reptile Network. But more importantly, for the highest quality of captive bred reptiles, make sure you head over to sundownreptiles.com and make sure you give him a follow on Instagram. Thank you again, Brian Susan over at Sundown Reptiles. One of the things I love about being a part of the reptile industry is all the learning, okay? Learning can be fun, and I can prove that to you. Thank you so much to today's sponsor. It's Gary Scavino over at gs.reptiles. I highly recommend you head over to his YouTube channel, follow all this man's content when it comes to learning about rare species of snakes you could be keeping in the hobby, and also just finding out how easy a lot of these rare species of snakes are to keep in general. So thank you so much, Gary Scavino of GS Reptiles. Again, head over to his YouTube channel. Also head over to his Instagram to be on top of all of his current work and be ready for a big year over at GS Reptiles. Thank you so much, Gary, for your ongoing support. I really appreciate it. Chee!
Alrighty, everybody, we are back. So kind of continuing this breeding conversation. So let's talk about the eggs a little bit. How big is a good, fertile, fully formed Boelen's python egg?
Oh, my biggest ones were like 3.5 inches long by 3 inches wide.
Oh wow, very okay.
It's like a Burmese python egg. I mean, I ain't kidding you, they're big.
Wow.
But average, probably, I don't know, ball python egg size. I don't know.
Okay, so pretty similar to scrub python eggs then.
Yep, yep. And then I noticed one thing, you know, the infertile eggs seem larger than the fertile eggs. I don't know if you noticed that.
Like the fully formed ones?
Yeah, the fully formed eggs that are infertile seem to always be larger on the Boelens.
Okay.
So.
Interesting. I'll have to kind of keep that in mind. Okay, that's very interesting.
My first female that laid this year, I took her out when I thought she was done. She was coiled around them, and I thought she was done, so I took her out. Yeah. And I pulled the eggs, and she still had one in her that it was almost ready to come out.
Yeah.
And she basically laid that egg in my hand, and it was a big, huge, long egg. It was the last one, is huge, and it is totally infertile. So. And then I noticed all the other big eggs were infertile too. So
really,
I thought that was weird.
So, that's strange.
Something I'm going to keep an eye on. So
yeah.
And I noticed that with my second clutch, the larger egg was infertile. So
okay, interesting.
And then you got the small slug size eggs. So,
yeah. So in the past, when you had gotten those, massive slug clutches from those big females that you had originally gotten. When those females eventually did breed, how many eggs did they lay when they were good?
The second clutch I got from her was 26 eggs. So they all looked good. That's why I left her on them.
Wow.
And I had no idea that the moldy eggs would kill the other eggs so quick. So, you know, otherwise I'd have pulled them immediately. And that's the whole reason I'm pulling them now, is because until I know I got 100% fertile eggs. So a lot more testing for me to do. So and then the third clutch that she had, she laid 10 eggs, and 10 or 11 are still in her. So she retained the other half clutch. So she would have laid a 21 clutch egg.
Oh wow!
Yeah, 21.
Damn. So, and she still has them in her now, you said?
Still to this day. So
how long ago was that?
That was 2022 when she laid that clutch. So
what?
And them eggs were Burmese python size eggs. Those are the ones that were 3.5 inches long. They're huge. And now they're about that big now. I mean, I can palpate her and I can feel them in her. And they're just there. So my vet said, don't worry about them. They ain't gonna go nowhere. They ain't gonna get septic. They get a coating over them, and they should be fine. So I tried to breed her this year, and I think I pulled the males too soon.
Okay.
That was another one of the issues where I was at Tinley Park instead of at home breeding snakes. So,
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get her to lay them naturally. So
Yeah.
which a lot of times pythons will do that. So
Sure.
so
she hasn't passed any of them.
none of them. So I took her to the vet and they aspirated the one closest to the vet.
Okay.
And that one passed, and the rest are just still in her. So and I was worried about them because they're so huge. They were such big eggs, but after a year they shrunk to about half the size. So, and then they're just hard like rocks. So
That's crazy.
So I figured she got at least one oviduct that works. So if I can get her to breed,
Yeah.
so maybe the rest of them eggs will come out. They definitely moved around this year because she's a super aggressive snake.
Okay.
And, she's 11 feet long and mean as hell. So it's kind of hard to do anything with her by yourself. So without getting bit. So
yeah.
I don't want to get bit by that snake.
I can imagine that would be a bad one. My gosh.
But,
so then when you do get the clutches and then now when you're pulling them, how are you setting up your egg boxes?
the first time, I tried the light diffuser over perlite and water.
Okay.
And them eggs they got dented in after about a month. So I took them off that, put them in vermiculite, and they kind of came back. I put some somewhat moist sphagnum on top of them.
Okay.
Kind of came back a little bit, and they end up hatching. So and then so the next clutch of eggs that I got, I put them on vermiculite. I do a sweater box type size box. Just like them Walmart ones that you get, the clear ones. I just use those.
Okay.
Got one hole on each side. My incubator has a basin of water in there, so it's humid like crazy.
Okay.
I've noticed the Boelen eggs will dent in pretty easily if it's not really humid. So, that's why I thought the water being over water would work, but
yeah,
it didn't seem to. And then these last two clutches, I put 2 clutches in 23 on vermiculite. That's coarse vermiculite at 100% hatch rate, but one of the babies died after it crawled out of the egg. And then 24, that just but I think I got 6 fertile eggs that year around a 10.
Okay.
And 3, I got 5 fertile eggs out of the 10, and 3 went bad right away. 1 went bad after about a month, and then the baby died before it hatched. So I slit the egg and it was dead in the egg.
Okay.
And then this year, I got the 2 clutches. Got what'd I get? 12 eggs the first clutch. 6 were fertile, or 2 looked iffy. Those 2 went bad, so I got 4 fertile eggs out of that clutch.
Okay.
And then the second clutch, which I was home for, and I was rotating the males in quite frequently, got 17 eggs. One of them was a slug, one of them was infertile, and 15 looked really good. But that whole clutch is just crashing like crazy. So
damn.
And the only different thing I did was I put them on fine vermiculite instead of the coarse. So I don't know if that made a difference. So next year I'm going to try all kinds of things. I'm going to go. I ordered a couple Sims containers.
Okay.
Large ones. I'm going to try that. I'm going to go back to the coarse vermiculite. I took some of the eggs that looked pretty bad and put it on coarse vermiculite, and they're hanging in there.
Okay.
So I don't know if that fine stuff is just, I don't know. I don't know if there's just too much
It definitely
for the eggs to sit on, you know. It's not as much airflow underneath them. I don't know.
it definitely holds a lot of moisture too. Like that fine stuff.
If I clump it in my fist and as tight as I can and open it and barely touch it, it just falls apart. You know, I mean, there's not much moisture in it.
Okay.
So if anything, it's too dry.
Okay.
I'd rather have it too dry. I can deal with eggs drying out. You know.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's ways to work around that. So.
Sure.
But them getting waterlogged, you know, that's my main concern.
Sure.
You can't. I mean, they're basically dead if you waterlog them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know what happened. So, like we were talking at the beginning, you know.
Yeah. I've definitely been there with scrubs where I've gotten eggs that all look great, and then like within the first couple of weeks, like half of them just completely crash out on me.
Yeah, this was like in a week. They were just like, just every day. You could just tell that one's dead, that one's dead, that one's dead. You know, I mean, you just tell. So
yeah. Yeah, and like I don't know.
Frustrating, but you know, what do you do? You know?
And what's so confusing is that the egg right next to that one will be one that hatches. It's like, what was the difference between this egg and that egg? You know.
You know, same temperature as I did before. You know, so you know, so I don't know what the difference is. So you know, other than the vermiculite. So
yeah. So what is the temperature that you're cooking them at?
88.
88. Okay.
It drops. It could go to 87.6 to 88.2, just right in that area. So
yeah,
I'm not too concerned about the temperature. So
okay, because I feel like I've heard of people attempting to incubate them like significantly cooler, assuming because they're a cold temperature species. But I think those experiments ended pretty poorly.
Yep, they end up as dead babies. So
yeah.
I talked to Frederick, and you know, I think he lives in Sweden or something like that. You know, and he's probably hatched more Boelens than anyone else. I'm pretty sure he has. And he uses the Sims container, so and had very good success. So
okay,
you know, I don't know why the light diffuser over water. I mean, it's basically a Sims container.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why that'd be any difference, but I'll try it. You know, they're only eggs. So.
Yeah. No, they've been. I mean, they're the only containers that I use in my scrub eggs now, and I've used some others in the past, and I've been pretty unhappy with some of the results. But yeah, I've hatched eggs over water and then also over like the water crystals, but my best clutches have been, well, I can't even really say that, but I feel like I've proportionally had more success when they're either on the substrate or like the light diffuser is right on the substrate instead of a gap between the water level and the eggs. I've had scrub eggs hatch still, but that have dented as soon as like a week and a half into incubation. And they're just these dented eggs for like 80 days and they'll still hatch out. But so I guess,
you know,
yeah.
So.
But in your experience with your good clutches, how long into incubation were you before you started to see denting where you're like, okay, this is when it's supposed to be happening?
Probably around, I don't know, 68 days or so. They hatch right around 75 days. You know, give or take a day or so. So on average, about 75 days. So.
Okay, so they're not denting like a month prior to hatching. It's pretty shortly there before.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
And some of the eggs look pretty nasty. I mean, it's like, man, is there something alive in there? You know, once I see the first pip, I just pip them. So
okay.
And I don't do a big one. I just do a little tiny little tiny triangle just to lift it up and take a peek in there.
Yeah.
See if there's a snake in there, and then I close it back up and let them do what they need to do. So
Okay.
most of the time they suck the eggs themselves and stick their head out. So
Okay.
I'm just checking to see if there's a live snake in there. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, this slit I make it's barely a half-inch long. So
Okay.
a little tiny wedge that I cut.
Okay. Cool. So with eggs that you've had that you start to see go bad or discolor or whatever throughout incubation, have you used any remedies to try to bring those eggs back?
I've tried I don't know what that shit's called, the foot powder.
Yeah,
Focus.
like the athlete's foot stuff.
Yeah, I've tried that, and that's helped on a couple eggs, So, but I mean, I haven't tried the Elmer's glue thing. Somebody suggested that to me. So,
For like molding eggs?
the wet spot eggs,
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
But I just tried that foot powder stuff and clean the egg off real good and sprinkle that on there and smear it on there.
Yeah.
And keeps the mold from growing back.
Yeah.
So you might have to do it a few times, throughout the month. So
Okay.
I've saved eggs that way. So
Okay. Yeah, I've had that happen. I mean, more times than I could count. Of like a good looking egg, just kind of like it gets like all wet and green and weird and shit, and then it's almost like
they usually dead. So
yeah. Well, it's like
they'll
like
get a dark. That's when I start treating them, and a little bit of white mold growing on it.
Okay.
But once they start in colors, I've noticed they've always been dead. So
yeah. Okay. Because like I'll kind of candle the eggs when they're starting to go, and it almost seems like all the blood vessels in the embryo have just burst or something like that.
Yep. That's what I'm seeing with some of my eggs.
Okay.
Yep. It's frustrating. It's like, what the hell? What went wrong here? Obviously we done something wrong. So
Sure. I mean, is there anything that you think you've deduced so far from your, I guess, I don't want to say failures because none of this is a failure, but the eggs that you get that don't make it the distance, like, trends that you've seen of like, okay, this is what I think may have happened here.
I haven't figured it out yet. So I'm gonna, I'm gonna figure it out. So
yeah,
I'm gonna keep working at it. So, it's something I definitely failed at. So, I don't blame the egg. I mean,
sure.
It appeared to be healthy. So I've done something wrong. So,
yeah,
I'm my worst critic. So,
same. Yeah, no, I get that. All right, so kind of on to the hatchling stage. So when they hatch out, are you leaving them together for a period of time before you separate them out individually?
yeah, I left them together until they started shedding. It was just easier.
Okay.
So and I usually put them on some sphagnum moss, some moist sphagnum moss, moist paper towel, and some sphagnum moss. That seems to clean them up real good. So,
And are you keeping them in the incubator, or are you doing them like in the racks in that setup?
in the rack.
Okay.
And as they shed, I just take the one they shed and put it in a tub by itself. So I don't wait until they all shed. As they shed, I just separate them out.
Okay. Okay. Cool. And then establishing babies. So what's that process like? How soon do you start to attempt the first feeding trials?
Usually within a couple of days of them shedding. So
Okay.
I'll start with unscented prey, either a mouse or a rat fuzzy, a hopper mouse.
Okay.
A small hopper mouse and a really small rat fuzzy.
Mhm.
Their Boelens are pretty small when they hatch.
Yeah.
So they're not very big.
Sure.
Scrub is much bigger, longer.
Okay.
I'll try that. and I'll try something different. It depends on what kind of response I get, you know, and I'll keep trying the unscented, and then I'll get frustrated with that one. Then I'll scent it and feed it, and it usually eats. So, you know,
Yeah.
I always try the unscented. You know, I want to get them on unscented right away.
Sure.
So, you know, and I tried everything. I tried African soft furs. I only had one take that.
Okay.
One was on coil forever, and that was just a mistake. I should have just let it starve a little bit longer, and it probably would have ate. But
Yeah.
my first real clutch that I hatched, so I wanted them all to do good.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I figured, you know, it can't be that hard to switch them once they start eating. That one took a long time to, you know, probably took 2 months to get it switched over. So,
Yeah, I've had that happen with baby scrubs that didn't want to start on rodents, that started on quail. And like you'll put a quail in front of them and they grab it and wrap it instantly. You put a mouse in front of them and they look at it like you put a water bowl in front of them. It's like they don't even recognize it's food.
yep. And I noticed they don't grow with the dam on coil at all.
No,
You know,
no, very poorly. Yeah.
and their shit looks like, you know, it's just runny. It's not a healthy food item, I don't think.
Yeah.
So, but they can survive on it. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, and I've heard different conversation around Boelens about prey selection, you know, birds versus rodents. What are your thoughts as far as that conversation goes?
100% rodent.
Okay.
You know, if they'll eat rodents, that's all I feed them. So, you know, I've raised plenty of snakes on just rodents, and you know, I got Timor pythons that are pushing 30 years old. You know, and I'd love to give those to somebody if they weren't so old. So, but you know,
Okay.
yeah,
Have you
they do just fine on rodents. So.
have you tried raising any on birds?
No, just because the way you know, the way it appears with the babies, how they don't grow.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the snake literally stayed one size compared to the other ones that were eating rodents.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Okay.
so to me, it's just, you know, granted, you know, they're only day old coils, so there ain't much nutrition to them.
Sure.
You know, they may do better on, you know, bigger birds, you know.
Yeah.
But I remember in the days when people were feeding chickens to Burmese pythons, you know, full size chickens, and that was a mess to clean up, you know, and much messier than a rodent or a rabbit.
Yeah.
So,
No, I could imagine. Yeah, I've had the same experience with scrub pythons. Because I acquired a collection of scrub pythons that were fed exclusively birds, and like the animals kind of looked like sickly. They had like
yeah,
big heads and like really like malnourished looking bodies. And
they don't
then
grow enough.
yeah, like it was like their head was the only thing that grew on their body. Like I had year and a half old snakes that were like the length of a neonate with the head of the size of a one that age and like this little pencil thin body that looked really sickly. So
Did
put
you
them
get
on
them switched?
rodents. Yeah, I mean, luckily a lot of them ate rodents right away. And you know, with some time and some persistent feeding was able to turn them around. But yeah, that was an interesting experience, especially I feel like when the trend towards feeding pythons less happened, there was also like a feeding lower fat content food item trend. And you know, I think then birds were kind of brought into the mix. And then worse than that, they were looked at by like, this bird looks as big as this rat. No consideration of the weight or like what the actual nutritional content of that is. And you know, I think some people just felt kind of like a superiority complex about feeding birds at the detriment of their snakes. So you know, I think that there's been a demonizing of the rodent in some people's eyes.
You know, a lot of people feed their rodents crap food, but if you feed them good food, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So and I just I've grown a lot of snakes up to 30 plus years old and nothing but on rodents. So
Yeah.
to me, is if a snake can hit 30 years old, you're doing good. So
Yeah, that you sure are. Absolutely.
Like the ones that were power fed, I mean, that does more damage than probably the scrubs that you brought back, from starving, so, just, I'm down to one of those, when they hit about 15 years old, they started developing tumors, and started one by one. So,
yeah, I know I had acquired some Moluccan scrubs that were kind of the same exact story. They were essentially power fed, and the biggest female, she was like just shy of 12 feet long, and I mean maybe like that thick around. She was huge. And when I got her, I've maybe fed her like 4 times in like the first 2 years I had her. She cycled, had like a giant ovulation unlike I've ever seen in any other snake, and then she dumped 25 slugs on me and died later that year. So
that's the power feeding.
yeah.
It does no good.
No. So that one was very hard. That sucked bad.
They're impressive when they're that big. Like my big female Boelens. She's impressive looking. But I'll take my smaller ones, but and each year they have more eggs and bigger eggs each year. So is what I've noticed. So
yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And but then there's the other end of the spectrum where I feel like some people will try to keep their snakes like they I want to have my Boelens lay eggs at 6 feet long. Like, okay,
I'm sure they will. I'm pretty sure they will. But in fact, I think Ari found one in the wild on eggs that was about 6 feet long.
Oh wow.
And it's just age wise, but growing them up slow can screw them up too. So
yeah,
you got to kind of find the middle ground and what works.
sure.
Pretty comfortable. I found the middle ground with my stuff. So
Yeah, I feel the same exact way. I feel like with pythons in general, if you withhold food while they're young, then that maybe more than anything will cause long-term health problems with that animal.
yeah, I feed my hatchlings probably, I don't know, between 7 and 10 days.
Okay.
A big food item to leave a lump in them. But
Yeah.
nothing huge.
Okay.
So and they seem to grow just fine. So
Okay.
I mean,
At what age do you kind of dial back the frequency of the meals?
probably a year.
Okay.
And it's not really dialing them back a whole lot because you're going to a bigger food item.
Yeah.
To 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks.
Okay.
I kind of just feed whenever I feel like it. So, I'll be like, oh, I haven't fed you guys for a while, so I better feed you. So,
yeah,
I go by what they do, what they're doing. If they're crawling around and looking for food, I let them do that for several days, and then I'll feed them. So,
okay.
And I mean, very rarely do you have a Boelens python refuse food. So,
I can imagine so. Okay.
And I'm feeding my almost 2-year-olds, either an adult mouse or a winged rat. So
Okay.
whatever I feel like grabbing out of the freezer. So,
Okay.
So the adult mouse don't leave that big of a lump, but a winged rat does. So.
Yeah. So then essentially by the time they're like at that 4-year mark, that's when they're kind of on that adult feeding schedule?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got my 21 hatchlings. They're eating as the rest of the adults. I thaw their food out at the same time. So
Okay.
every one of my animals eat frozen thawed. So
Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'd have to imagine that live would not really be a necessary thing for most Boelens once they're on food.
yeah.
Okay. So at this point now, how many clutches total have you gotten in your career of Boelen's breeding?
Ooh, let's see. Let me count them real quick. I've gotten 8 clutches in 6 years.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's I mean, that's probably
clutches too. So, to me, an infertile clutch is a success. So
sure.
I mean, for years people couldn't get them. So
Yeah. And then, I mean, aside from your usage of multiple males, is there anything else you're equating to that success that other people haven't been doing?
I'd say mainly the multiple males and keep your animals trimmer. So quit feeding your animals so much.
Yeah.
I'm sure my animals are overweight. So, and mine are pretty thin. So.
Okay. Because you said that when the females lay, you don't see like a significant weight loss event there?
Nope. Usually 2 feedings, they're back to normal, 100%.
Wow. Interesting.
Like I said, they might only go off food for 1 month. So
yeah.
And I actually fed my first female that laid after her pre-lay shed, like a week after her pre-lay shed. So
wow.
So she just acted so hungry, and I was like, so I just fed her a smaller food item, like a little bit bigger than a large small rat.
Wow.
Nothing real big, So.
That's insane. I mean, shoot, most colubrids won't eat after their pre-lay shed.
Yeah, usually they don't, but she was just acting really hungry, so.
Wow.
Every time I walked by the cage, she was coming towards it. So, well, I don't need you to be doing this stuff. So, thawed something out and gave it to her. She took it right away.
Wow.
Didn't affect the egg laying or nothing. So,
interesting. Huh. That's fascinating.
But I do stuff a little different than everybody else. So,
I mean, it sure is working. So,
I don't think too many people keep their snake room at 72 degrees. So,
no. No. So do you just let that room naturally kind of rise and fall in temperature with the year?
Yep.
Okay.
Since I live in the Midwest, it gets minus freaking 18 here, a couple weeks out of the year. So, it'll drop down to, if I let it, I could probably get it down to 40 degrees in my basement, but on average, it probably gets down to 58 or so. I got my house, the back of my house faces east, so that's the coldest wall. So I line my males up on that wall. So, so I let them get the cold. So, everybody says the males need to be cooler to produce more viable sperm. So I may let them get cooler this year. So, if it gets real cold, down, I'll leave just the floodlight on to keep the air temperature warm. Because sometimes it gets pretty cold down there. So
I can imagine.
I don't believe pythons are meant to get that cold. So it don't hurt the Boelens. I mean, they're cruising around in the morning when I go down there before the lights come on.
That's amazing.
And I can hear them at night, just at random. Like I said, they're not graceful snakes. I hear them falling off the ledges all the time. So, throughout the night, I hear them thump.
That's funny.
Yeah, they're not graceful at all.
So when it is that cold during the winter, are you still feeding them?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
And just
I just keep their no problem whatsoever. A lot of times when you feed them, they'll go in the cold side of the cage anyway. So
really
digest. So,
wow.
They're different. They're a different snake.
Yeah, that's just like a paranoia that I have with all of my snakes, and probably not entirely founded, but just like like during the winter after I feed, I might keep the room a little bit warmer that night than I do the rest of the week. But definitely, that's just, I don't know, the thought of having a python digesting food in the 50s is just mind blowing to me.
Yeah, You know, right now, I mean, at night they get down to 68 degrees right now. So
Okay.
at nighttime low right now is 68. So,
Okay. And then it comes up to 72 during the day.
yeah, about 72. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then, you know, they got their spot, you know, so.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if that's a key to breeding them too, you know, keeping them cooler, you know. But it, you know, that's just the way I keep my snakes. So I kept my boas that way too. So.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I guess it kind of forces them to do a little bit more, you know, thermal regulation if they're not at a kind of a constant temperature like that.
You know, like I said, you know, I've seen them go from, you know, the basking area to their nest box and keep that nest box at 90 degrees. So all night. So they can retain their heat pretty easily. So.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense if you're like a, you know, a snake that's like 85+% black, that, you know, that they would soak up that heat really well and hold on to it for a long time. So,
you know, I'll temp gun the hot spot, you know, it's 85 degrees on the hot spot, and then I'll temp gun them, and they're like 96 degrees. So, you know, so they get pretty warm.
yeah. Yeah. That's it's so interesting just to know like the true extremes of the temperatures that they'll experience, you know, from that basking temperature and that beating hot sun to the cool nights. Just, it's so fascinating.
And I'm sure in the wild, you know, when they go into their, you know, hide area, you know, that's been sitting out in the sun all day. You know, I'm sure it takes a long time for that temperature to drop. So,
Sure.
you know, I'm sure in the wild it don't get probably as cold. So.
Sure. They just find their little microclimates that, yeah, because I feel like, you know, you can only take so much from those kind of air temp readings and whatnot from over there, because it's not really giving you a true idea of where the snakes are actually spending their time.
Yeah, I mean, unless you know, like the nest areas, you know where they're at. You know, and Ari does a pretty good job on taking all the measurements. You know, so.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, what about the rest of the year? You know, so.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know nothing about them hardly. So.
Yeah.
You know.
No, absolutely.
You know, what temperatures are staying at? Hell, yeah. I mean, it took him 15 years to find a male. So.
Yeah.
You know,
seriously.
You know. So,
Hmm.
You know, that was my big thing. Where are the males going? Are they higher up? Are they cooler all the time, and then they come down and look for the females? I don't know. So that's always been something in my mind too. So.
Yeah, we talked about it on here, Ari and I. But do you remember the context which he found that male?
I don't remember.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, because that'd be interesting. But I bet it probably also has to do with time of year, considering that, you know, he's obviously been trying to find nests and babies and whatnot primarily. So.
Yeah, he wasn't really going over there to find males. So.
Yeah.
You know.
So it makes sense.
Yeah, that's why I've been trying to get a hold of Al Baldego, and because he used to go over there and collect them, and he'd collect males and females. So I was kind of hoping that I could hook up with him one day.
Okay.
Pick his brain. So.
Yeah.
I mean, all of us people trying to breed Boelens, we need to stick together and compare notes. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
That's the whole reason I go to Tinley, is just to tell people you can breed Boelens. So.
Yeah, well, and you know, I really admire that about you, of how forthcoming you are with the information about them, because I feel like most people who are in a position like yourself, to where they're one of, if not the only person breeding a very highly coveted species, they have a lot of incentive to hide that information. You know, keep that close to the chest, and that is not how you operate.
No, my wife said, "Yeah, you shouldn't be telling everybody because they're your competition." I'm like, "They're not my competition. I don't sell them." So you know.
Fair enough.
You know, so I mean, no one else is going to get caught up to me. I mean, there's a few people that got pretty good groups, you know, but you know, until they start breeding them, you know, I'm not too worried about it. So
Sure.
And I really think more people need to breed them, because one day this might be all we got. So you know, I've seen a lot of reptiles leave the hobby because people aren't breeding them. So
Seriously, too many.
so, yep, way too many, and Boelens shouldn't be one of them. So
No, definitely
I
not.
have no problem helping everybody out, but what I do is works for me, it probably won't work for you.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
not very many people, everybody's concerned about their snake getting bit. I throw mine in there and they get bit, I don't walk away from them. Like when I'm introducing the males, like this year was pretty exciting, so, while last year they started pushing each other around, the males did. They
Okay.
just, they do that, like the rattlesnakes and carpet pythons, they coil up on each other and push
Yeah.
each other around. They started doing that shit in, last year, and they kind of quit doing it and settled down. And when I introduce two males, they do a little bit of pushing, then they go right to breeding. So
Okay.
this year, when I first started introducing them, they were really pushing each other around really hard and just really going at it. And after about a month of that, I'd introduce a male in the cage, and then I'd go to introduce the second male in there to see what they'd do. And he would crawl across the female straight up to the male and just chomp down on it. That quick, As soon as he got in the cage, he'd crawl straight to the male and bite him.
Wow.
That happened several times, and it's like, motherfuckers, So I just started watching their body language, and the males would, you've seen how males will arch their bodies on the female, rub everything. They would do that. If they did that, don't even attempt to put another male in with them, because they're going to each other. So I just watch their body language and see what the hell they're doing. And so this year I couldn't do males together at all this year. I just rotated them a little bit quicker.
Okay.
So, and that seemed to help. So at least it helped with my second clutch, getting more fertile eggs.
Yeah.
So
makes sense. I mean, at this point, what are some of the things that you have on your mind to try to do, to further husbandry that we haven't, necessarily touched on yet?
I'm going to try cooler temperatures during breeding.
Okay.
Just at like 5 degrees or so.
Okay.
Cooler. Start small. Just keep an eye on them. Make sure they don't get an RI or anything like that. And then introduce my males a little later.
Okay.
So just because, like we said, do they really need to be in there the 3 months of breeding?
Yeah.
Because, the eggs don't get fertilized until they, ovulate. So,
right.
So why waste all that energy? I kind of know my females ovulate. So, approximately. So I'll start, I definitely go a month later. So
okay, interesting. Yeah, I think I might do the same thing with my scrub pythons this coming year, of just not doing any sort of preemptive pairings, just waiting until my females are developing, and then let the males get in there and get the job done.
So, and if it don't work, there's always the next year. So
that is true.
Go back a little bit. 24. I thought, well, shit. I did 3 males to the females. I only used 3 males. I thought that was the issue, but I think the issue was me going to Tinley and not being home, rotating the males is the real issue.
Yeah.
Because that's what I figured out this year was the issue. So I'll know next year, because I'm going to skip the March Tinley. So
okay.
Which sucks. I really enjoy that show. So
yeah.
Hopefully they'll let me keep my table in October.
I hope so too. Yeah, that's to have some Boelens at the Tinley Park show is always a needed addition, considering that we can get, you can get lost in the sea of the same stuff over there.
Yep. We need to get some scrubs up there. So again,
for sure.
That's a fun show. I mean, I wish Dallas was better.
Me too.
I don't like that new venue. So
no, it's not good.
So, but I enjoy going down there and talking to all the people. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's the best part of that show is the community down there, all the Texas people. The old Arlington venue was amazing, but that's gone now. So
So yeah, I enjoy them shows. I mean, I'd like to do the California show, but I drive everywhere, so that's a 20-hour drive for me. So
yeah, that's quite the haul. That's
which ain't no big deal because I used to do back in the day. I used to do the Florida show before Daytona.
The Orlando.
Orlando, yeah, can't think of what
Yeah.
the hell the town. Yeah, I used to go to that show every year. So, and that was a killer show. So, those were really good times.
Yeah, I can. I wasn't able to based on just not having been alive, but it would be awesome to have been able to experience some of those Orlando shows. I've heard the stories, and it just seems like we will probably never experience anything like that again in the industry.
No, they had every type of animal you could imagine there. So
yeah,
I mean, I've seen a lot of cool stuff down there. So
yeah,
and then going to Crutchfields and all the other wholesalers down there. That was a blast back in them days.
no, sure.
So, just things changed a whole lot from then to now. So, some better, some worse. So,
Yeah,
I wish the ball python shit wouldn't have happened because we lost a lot of animals because of that. So,
we sure did. Yeah,
I just wish people would have looked at it as more, hey, let's not make all this money and let's breed some of these other stuff still. So.
or do both simultaneously. Keep a couple pairs of this or that with your ball.
I'm glad everything's kind of going back to the old way where people are keeping multi.
Yeah,
in their collection. So
I agree.
Good friend of mine, he's all into the ball pythons now. He's doing chondros and other tree snakes. So
Yeah,
so he kind of learned that ball pythons aren't where it's at anymore.
yeah. No, I feel like that just is we are where we are at this point of just the market's over the hill. It's kind of like where like corn snakes or leopard geckos were like a decade ago.
I love seeing corn snakes at the shows now. So
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
all the other colubrids. So
yeah. I mean, I guess probably pre Palmetto corn, there were countless corn snakes at reptile shows, and then that really just kind of hit the crescendo of the market, and then it really kind of tapered off. And now you're lucky to see a couple tables of corn snakes at a big show. Same thing with leopard geckos. As soon as the lemon frost thing happened and people lost their ass on that, and then crested geckos blew up, you don't really see that many leopard geckos anymore at reptile shows.
no,
compared to what you used to.
Crested geckos are kind of fading out too. So
yeah, I mean, shoot, when people at Tinley have crested geckos on the table marked at $500 and they're selling them for $35 on Sunday, you probably have too many, and because they're making room for their new babies, the market's probably a little oversaturated. So
yeah, my daughter does lychees, so kind of seeing the market drop on those too. So
sure,
they don't produce enough to where we worry about it. So
yeah, no, fair enough.
They're enjoyable to work with. So
yeah, they're very cool geckos for sure. But on that topic of the market, I mean, what's your take on the Boelen's market these days? Because it's definitely seen quite the change over the last 15 years or so.
Yeah, the price, I didn't know what to price them at.
Yeah.
I talked to other people about it, and I'm like, well, what do you price these at? To me, they're worth double of what a wild caught is coming in for, or an import, whatever you want to call them, and well, the only imports you can find are, the cheapest ones, usually 75 to 12,000.
Yeah.
I can't double that price, so
no.
So I picked 10 grand for them.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair price for captive Boelens, and I could have sold everyone that I produced. So
yeah,
there's definitely a market for them. So you're never going to get rich at Boelens. I definitely don't think you'll ever make a living at them.
Yeah.
So, but there is an incentive to breed them, if you can get 10 grand. I mean, the price will drop eventually. So, I priced them at 10, hoping that the imports would go down. But
Yeah.
so I don't know what the hell. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess, another point of kudos for you is not, overly inflating that price to where, if you're selling them for $20,000 a piece, I mean, no one's going to buy a pair at that price.
but they'll buy a pair of fucking ball pythons for $40,000.
Yeah,
Figure that one out.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and granted, yeah, I find you should have at least, 3 or 4 males to each female. Where it's opposite with ball pythons. So
Right.
but I mean, I'd much rather look at a Boelens than any ball python out there. So
Yeah.
I'd rather go down to my basement than a freaking room of racks and racks of ball pythons.
Yeah.
I mean, I can sit down and look at every one of my snakes from a chair. So,
Yeah. No, that's definitely something to be said for that. And I think that's kind of what you were saying earlier. Some of the trends of the hobby are more towards diversity, fewer animals, bigger enclosures, emphasis on actually enjoying the experience as opposed to just maximizing square footage for breeding's sake.
And I learned that from keeping monitors, a bigger
Yeah.
cage. I mean, it's just enjoyable to watch them, and when you're trying to breed these things, just watching them, just trying to learn everything you can about them. That's what, I like.
Yeah.
This time of year kind of, it isn't as exciting for me as, the winter breeding them. So,
Sure.
but,
Yeah, I definitely get that.
they're definitely aware every time you walk down there.
Yeah.
I'm sure you watch your scrubs, they know when you're in that room.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no question.
And the Boelens are the same way. I mean, before I even get around the corner to where they can see me, they know. So I mean, they're an interesting animal. So
Yeah.
that's probably what I'm going to focus everything on is just the Boelens for right now. So,
Okay. Yeah. So you don't really foresee yourself getting into any other projects?
I don't think so. No, not right now. So
Yeah.
I'll probably get rid of several projects. So just so I can focus. I mainly want to focus with the Boelens.
Yeah.
No one else is really doing it. So and like I said, we need to start communicating with everybody and seeing what the hell everybody's doing right and wrong. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll answer anybody's messages. So
Yeah. Well, that again, yeah, definitely kudos to you for doing that and being such a wealth of information with them. Not gatekeeping the information either, because that is as we've been saying, way too prominent within our industry.
I know very little about them. I mean, there's so much more to learn about them. So
Sure.
each year I learn something new about them. So
Yeah.
I'm not just looking to get by on breeding and hatching a couple here and there. I want every clutch to be 100%.
Yeah.
Everything to be perfect. So I'll keep working at it until I get there. So
Yep. All right. Well, I'm excited to watch your journey. This is going to be, it already has been, and it's going to continue to be a fun one to follow along with.
I mean, they're easy to breed. I mean, all you need is a pair, and put them together. So, I mean, breeding is not a problem. It's getting them to ovulate and hatch.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
things become difficult for me. So,
For sure.
I mean, so far I've hatched 20. So,
Hey, that's better than almost anyone who's ever lived. So you're doing something right.
so I was hoping to hatch another bunch, another 20 this year, but it's just not in my favor this year. So,
Yeah.
So next year I'll be doing 4 females. So I got 2
Okay.
to late here, so I'll do 4, and then after that, my 23s will be getting close. So I'll be using my 23 males. So,
Nice.
and like I said, I held back 15 of those. So most of them are all girls, but
Yeah.
and I'm trading some off to another guy, to get some new blood. So
Okay.
And I have no problems trading straight up for people, that are bringing them in.
Mhm.
They're getting a better deal, I think. But
Yeah, for sure.
I'm getting new blood, so
Yeah.
I have no problems with the imports as long as they're NIDO free. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
definitely got to have that quarantine room ready. So
Yes. Most certainly. Most certainly.
don't want nothing going on in my basement. So
No. I mean, you've made it this far. That's got to be priority number one.
and, I've never tested NIDO on any of my imported Boelens, but I don't think they'd live at the temperatures I keep them at if they had NIDO. So
It's a good point. It's definitely a good point. Yeah.
all the stuff I put them through. So
Yeah.
stress of males, combating and all that good stuff. So
Yeah. No, most certainly.
now you just need to get some. So
Yes. I agree. I absolutely agree.
We'll work something out. So
Yep. Absolutely. It's definitely, it's a dream of mine. Definitely one that I hope to make a reality sooner than later. So, because
not many people are importing them anymore either. So
yeah,
there's fewer and fewer of them coming into the United States. So
yeah, for sure.
from what I hear, other people are paying more money for them. So they're shipped out to other countries. So
Yeah.
they've seen the stupid prices we're selling them for. So
Yeah, exactly.
and I guess I'm part of the fault for that. So
I mean, I wouldn't say that. I think you kind of fell into place with a market that had already become super inflated as is. Import selling for like 15 grand a piece or something like that. It's just
I would never be able to buy them at that price.
yeah,
So,
nobody. Yeah,
I mean, I sold my whole collection of boas and then some stuff, and to buy the 8 that I bought. So, I mean, and still, they weren't even close to the $12,000, but they're still the most expensive I've ever bought. So,
sure. Yeah.
and I don't think we'll ever see that low price on them ever again. So,
No, I can't imagine. So, I mean, I think a minor correction, sure, but probably not like a 5 grand pair. That'll be
no,
that's not
and
going to.
that's what I was paying was 5 grand a pair. So,
Yeah.
and I mean, I don't think we'll ever see that again. So
No, I think when I first when I first saw Boelens available, when I was really looking, they were 5,500 a pair, and that was probably in 2015, and probably 2015.
forever, Cameron at Bushmaster, he had them at 35 forever. So, and, I got mine about when Cameron was doing them for 35.
Okay.
But before that, I could have got them for like $1,000 or $1,200. So
Yeah.
I first attempted to try to get them, but that deal fell through. So, and that particular guy quit buying stuff from Indo. So
Okay.
totally went away. So
Yeah.
which sucked, but
Yeah, I could imagine so.
But I'd be a lot further along, I think, because I still, I've been thinking about breeding Boelens since I've seen them back in the late 80s. So, I've always wanted them. So,
Yeah.
just something about a big, that black snake that's super iridescent,
I mean, there's a reason why they are as coveted as they are. It's not a fluke. They're
and we don't know more with them. They just need to stay with the way they are. I don't want to ever see an albino one. So,
that would ruin it. That would completely ruin it.
Totally ruin it. If I had one, I'd throw it in the damn freezer. So I don't ever want to see a morph. So
yeah,
just keep them the way they are.
I agree with that. I definitely agree.
Maybe
Well,
make, I like the ones that are more black than, how the yellow bands go over their back.
hmm,
If we can eliminate, I like them where their back's all black,
okay.
where the bands don't go over. I like them
Yeah.
just going sides.
Okay.
And
Makes
I talked to Ari about those, and he said they come from PNG, so they're more frequent over there. That's what I saw when I was, in the late '80s.
Okay.
They just had the white bars going up their sides, not going over their back like they do now. So,
Yeah. Okay.
but I got some that are pretty close to that. Some of my hatchlings, so I'll be line breeding for that. So
Yeah. Cool. I'm excited to see how that project plays out. That'll be a cool one.
And the black and white ones, I don't think we ever see those ever. Like we did it back when they first were coming in.
Yeah.
A different locality. Mostly see the black and cream or yellow. Plus, it depends on the lighting too.
Sure.
Because I can take mine outside, they look totally different. So, than underneath the UV light.
Yeah.
Or under fluorescent light.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Absolutely. Well, man, this has been a really amazing conversation, really one that I can have with almost nobody else in the entire world. I really appreciate your time tonight, all of the information that you were so gracious to share with us.
And I heard you say that I have not produced more Boelens than Frederick.
Okay.
He's ahead of me, but I think I got him on how many years in a row?
Okay.
I
Well,
just think, but he's produced more Boelens than me. So
okay. But so then next year you'll probably take the crown.
I don't know. So if he still has Boelens, so
Fair enough.
He knows what the fuck he's doing. So
That is true. That is very true.
And there's a few other guys out there that are working with or have success. So
For sure.
They're getting closer and closer each year. So I try to talk to as many people as I can. So
Yep. Absolutely.
I'm sure just like with you with scrubs, you talk to everybody.
Yes. 100%.
You never quit learning in this business. So
No, you don't.
Once you think you got it figured out, you're wrong. So
Yep. Every time, without fail.
I'm pretty sure I can get eggs every year, though. I'm pretty confident I can say that. So
Okay. Yeah.
And I totally changed the way I'm doing things, but I can always go back and I know how to get eggs. So,
Yeah. Fair enough.
But I'm going to tweak it, as much as I can each year. So, like I said, I'm not going to be happy until everything's perfect.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I'm excited to see, man. I'm really excited to see how things kind of continue to play out for you. This is it's a fun journey to be watching from the sidelines.
Well, it's frustrating doing it. So,
Yeah.
Like I said, you only got one time a year. So, and then
Yeah.
when you screw that up, you got to wait a whole another freaking year. So, it just, it's crazy. So,
Yeah. That sure is.
I sure would love to figure out if I could breed them twice a year. When I get more animals to work with, I may try.
Yeah.
Here, so
That would be an interesting experiment for sure.
That's why I'm focusing just mainly on Boelens right now. So
Yeah.
keep trying different things. So
Yep. Absolutely.
and if anybody wants, I can help you out in any way I can. So all you got to do is message me.
So what are the best ways for people to reach you and to follow what you're doing?
Instagram or Facebook. So Flood Reptiles. So
Okay. Great.
My daughter keeps up on all that crap. I don't do none of that shit. So, I'll message with you, and if it starts getting too in depth, I'll just send you my phone number, and I'll talk on the phone. So, that texting crap sucks. So,
Yeah, I agree. Well, cool, man. Thank you again so much for your time tonight. This was a really amazing conversation. I loved it, and I know everyone else who was listening loved it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I can help out. So,
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
like I said, anybody that wants any information, just get a hold of me. So,
All
and
right.
I'm not selling any babies, so anytime soon. So,
All right. Yep. So don't ask.
those messages can quit. So, but when I start producing a bunch, then they'll be up for sale.
Cool.
My wife told me I only have to sell one a year, so or something, so
Yeah.
so
All
that's
right.
all I can do. So
Cool.
I'd rather trade them and get more bloodlines going. So
Yeah. No question. Absolutely.
and each locality looks different too. You see it with scrubs,
Oh
but
yeah.
I see it with Boelens too. So
Yeah.
I mean, there's quite a bit of different in pattern, between the 4 localities that I got. So
Okay.
I can tell the difference. I can tell by looking at them which one came with which group. So
Hmm. What are the 4 localities? Where are they from?
I don't know I just got them at different times, so they came from all different places. So I know the last the 8 that I got, the 4.4. I got 2 males, 3 males and a female from one at the beginning of the year that came from one area, and then the other 2.2 came from another area, and then my ones were obviously a lot older, so they came from another area. I don't know the localities. I'm
Okay.
trying to get localities on any of the ones I get now. I'm hoping I can get localities, but you can tell they came from different areas because they look different. So
Sure.
you know,
Okay, that makes sense.
their belly's got more white on one group, or their bands are a lot thinner on another group, so they tend to look a little different. So
Okay.
so
Cool.
they're got to be in different localities,
Sure.
and like Ari said, the blacker ones come from the PNG side. So
Yeah.
so but
All right. Cool. Well, yeah, definitely. It's good to know that there are more questions that are still yet to be answered on that. So that'll be cool.
oh, there's tons of questions.
Well,
And I don't have answers for any of them. So, very few. So,
hey, one day at a time.
yep.
Well,
Just
Scott,
keep working at it.
yeah. Well, once again, man, thank you for doing the show tonight. I really appreciate your time, and we'll definitely be keeping up with everything that you're doing.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, have a good night, man. Appreciate it.
Yep. Yep. Bye.
All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning into that episode. Definitely one of the best ones yet, jam-packed of some of the best information out there. Like I said at the beginning, if you like that show, please subscribe here on the YouTube channel. We are on the audio platforms as well, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcast from. For me, I am on Instagram at scrubshepherd, Stephen Kush on Facebook, and then also Kush Reptile or Stephen Kush on YouTube as well. I drop a new video every single Friday. I'm also at Kush Reptile on MORPH Market. And of course, I am here every single Wednesday on the Trap Talk Reptile Network. So thank you guys again for tuning into this episode. Catch you all back here next week for a new one.